Comics in Savannah, Georgia. I appreciate you taking the time tonight to join us here at the old comic shop. So at the top of the show, I want to tell everybody what we've got going on coming up. We got a couple of cool things happening. We always try to keep it busy. One of which, if you are a regular monthly subscriber to your comics were late today, but they are here now. So check your email. It'll have everything you've got in your sides waiting on you. You can pay for that online. Stop in whenever you guys can. A week from today, the first comic in our publishing imprint comes out. So all these perfect crosses, written by Craig Finn of The Hold Steady, illustrated by Andrew Greenstone. So much fun. It's really been an honor to be a part of this book and help bring this to life. Andrew, a SCAD grad here in Savannah, worked on some cool stuff. You've probably seen his work in the Nib. And Craig, of course, new Hold Steady record came out this week. All these perfect crosses, his record store day exclusive. This is what the comic is based on. Two versions. We've got a standard and a deluxe. The deluxe has a ton of extra behind the scenes stuff, which is really fun. Fans of small press, indie, vintage stuff. We got a nice stack of Crumb era books, San Francisco comics with an X here in the shop. We'll have those priced out. We'll send stuff to all our socials when that's ready. Today on the old show, we have a real treat. So we're going to be talking to Matthew Rosenberg. Matt has written probably some of your favorite comic books. I mean, here at the shop, we like to put books like We Could Never Go Home and Four Kids Walk Into a Bank into your hands. But Matthew has written on so many titles, and he's currently working with Nick Spencer on Amazing Spider-Man, and you probably have seen his stuff in X-Men, and I could really just sit here and list stuff all day, and we'll get into that. But I have a special guest joining me as well. So my friend and, my contributor to the shop, and that he comes and picks up his books every week, Jason Combs is here. What's up, Jason?
How's it going?
Jason is a voracious comics reader. He has a wonderful collection that he's curated, and he's one of those people who somehow manages to stay on top of what's happening in comics week to week, in part because he does have a real, he searches it out. You listen to podcasts, you read the books, as much as you can every week. You scour the back issue bins and you fill out your collection. What are you reading right now, Jason, that got you super excited?
Well, I've pretty much always kept up with Amazing Spider-Man and X-Men, whatever their flagship is at the moment, whether it's No Adjective or Uncanny. I pick up a few other things. There's a lot of stuff I picked up because you've recommended it. Now that you put me on the spot, I can't remember. I have to look at my pile here. I've got my whole box full of stuff I got at Dollar Day, which I won't even say how much I spent. So that was a lot of fun going through all that. But,
you left with 2 grocery sacks full?
I did. And I knocked out all of my credit I had, from previous purchases. I like to blow that on the Dollar Days.
That's why it's there, man.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, top of my list is always Amazing Spider-Man and the X books. I've been following all the Hickman stuff and previously, and then trying to go back and fill in my holes from previously.
Where is your Amazing Spider-Man collection at right now? Like, how many issues do you think? I mean, you probably know, but how shy of you are of completing your run?
Oh, I'm way shy of being complete, but I am very proud that I have about a 400 solid issue run now with no gaps, from current all the way back through about halfway through when they did the John Byrne relaunch. So basically when JMS started writing, I've got a solid run from JMS all the way to current.
Wow, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and then
I've been able to get 2 or 3 of those in your hands, which is nice. So
yeah,
I'm happy.
Yeah, you helped me. You helped me find the ones that plugged the holes I had in that huge run I was going for.
That's me, hole plugger number 1.
There you go.
Without further ado, we're going to bring in Matt. He's been so patient sitting in the green room here. We're going to throw him in. I love the 3, 2, 1 countdown. I got to always do that. Matt Rosenberg joining us from the island of Manhattan. How you doing, sir? Matt, I've got you muted. That's on me, brother. There you go. Okay. Now, how are you doing, Matt?
I was just cursing before, so this is better. I got that out of my system. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You're so gracious with your time, jumping in tonight with us. And I have to say, it is kind of tradition at this point. I don't think I've done an episode where I haven't forgotten to unmute someone. It's usually me. So
Oh, well, that's fair. I usually, when I tend to ramble in these things, I get nervous in interviews, like I get weird, and so I'll ramble. So at any point, you just mute me, and my mouth will be moving. You just ask the next question. That's fine.
This is not an interview, so we'll start off with that, and we'll get to your Yoo-hoo in just a second that you're drinking. But
Sure.
This is just a couple people hanging out at the comic shop talking about comic book stuff, and it just happens to be that one of these people at the table writes really cool comic books. so that's the kind of thing that we do all the time. So you're in good hands here.
Sure.
So you're drinking a Yoo-hoo in a box.
In the box, yeah. The Yoo-hoo's it's a volatile drink. Comes in a can, comes in a box, comes in a bottle. The bottle's like not very good. The can is decent, and then the juice box is the ideal. So. I tend to go for the juice box.
I didn't realize there was a hierarchy of YouTube and not YouTube, Yoo-hoo enjoyment.
Oh yeah. It's a complex beverage. It's not like your beer.
Oh.
Matt, since you're in New York, can you see who's on my coffee mug? Lenny Briscoe from Law and Order.
Sure.
Okay.
Love me some Lenny Briscoe.
Sure. Of course. The most New York thing you could have.
There you go.
My childhood best friend, who I'm still very good friends with, his dad was a producer on Law and Order, and when we were kids, we used to it would just film all over Manhattan, but you'd just be walking down the street, and the Law and Order crew would be there, and I would just walk onto set and eat at craft services. Like I'd be out, skateboarding, and there they'd be, and I'd just go and get a bagel or get, a soda. And every once in a while they'd catch you and they'd be like, "Who are you?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm so-and-so's son." And once they were like, "No, you're not." And I was like, "Damn it. I'm about to be in trouble." And then they brought him out and he's like, "No, I know this kid. He's fine." But Lenny Briscoe, the best. That's my favorite era of Law and Order.
My girlfriend and I actually have a dog named Briscoe after Lenny Briscoe.
Oh, I didn't realize that's where Briscoe's name is from.
That's where Briscoe's name comes from.
Excellent.
This is the kind of high quality content we develop here, Matt. So,
I mean, I'll talk about
Law and Order podcast.
I'll talk about Law and Order all day.
We're breaking down every episode. Well, you've got your Yoo-hoo. Congrats. I went next door to White Whale, and which is a little craft beer bar next door. And I looked at the menu and I said, "What is the darkest, strongest thing?" And here it is. So what is it called? What is it? I don't remember. Sure. All I know is I borrowed some headphones I couldn't get to sync up over there, and I got a beer. So I'm in it to win it, sir.
That sounds good. You're doing excellent.
All right,
I have just a couple juice boxes. That's all I got. When they're gone, I'm gonna be punchy. But
all right, we're gonna make good use of your time from here on out. Then, so that growing up, you grew up in New York, so that's something that. So you've been there for a while, for a minute. That's your home. What was your first exposure in New York? I feel like most people, I mean, especially somebody who kind of grew up in a small town, you have all these kind of visions of what it's like to grow up as a kid in New York and what you have access to and some of the freedoms and everything else you kind of expect or think about. But when you were a kid, what was your first exposure to comics? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, for sure. I have an older brother, and so he was the person who was bringing comics into the house when I was a kid. And he was buying X-Men stuff, a lot of the Claremont stuff, John Byrne stuff. So and he was big on, he's 4 years older than me, so he was big on the if you touch them, I'll kill you kind of idea. And so as soon as he would leave the house, I would sneak into his room and read all his comics, and that's honestly how I learned to read, was being 3, 4, 5-year-old kid reading X-Men comics, trying to figure out, what the hell was happening in the Dark Phoenix and all that stuff. But then growing up, as I got older, both of my parents are writers, so they always very encouraging of us reading and like we had allowance, and it was, not very much because my parents were writers, but their rule was kind of always like, well, if you want a book, you can have a book. Like, that doesn't have to come out of your allowance. Like, we want you to read and develop that. And I grew up with a comic book shop on my block. So
is it still here? Is it still around?
No, it closed in the 90s. But it was a great comic shop called Big Apple Comics. It was upstairs, was the second floor, and the first floor was a really good burger restaurant called Happy Burger.
Nice.
And I always say, like, they had great burgers and milkshakes, and that was pretty much my, not every day, but 3 days a week was go to the comic shop, read some comics, buy some comics, go to pick up lunch and go home. But that was like, as formulative as a building can be in someone's life is a building for me that is a burger place with a comic shop on top. And that's just sort of, where I've kind of resided ever since emotionally.
All you're doing is feeding that idea that I had of how much better kids had it in a big city. You're not doing anything to discourage that idea that I had as a kid.
It's funny because it's always like, people always talk about like the defining moment of like, I'd bike to the 7-Eleven and get my comics. And that's like we didn't have 7-Elevens. We didn't have anything like that. Like, and I don't think the supermarket sold comics. I don't remember that, but we had comic shops. I had 2 that were like within 4 blocks of my house. So there was the one that was really good, and there was the one that would rip you off. And so it was good.
So what do you remember picking up at the one that ripped you off? Like,
oh man, one of the first things I collected was I collected the Marvel Star Wars books.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, that was the first thing, because like my brother had a bunch of X-Men, so I could read those, and I was reading the Marvel G.I. Joes, but those were pretty easy to get after you got issue 2. Issue 2 was hard to track down, but the rest were like kind of available. But the Star Wars books were, before I was born, before my time, and that was a hunt. And when my comic shop didn't have them, then I was like on the hunt, and it was just the comic shop that would rip you off was just brutal about it. And they'd come in and I honestly felt like sometimes I'd go in and they were like, see me coming and pulling all the Star Wars books and re-stickering them.
Retailers would never do that, Matthew.
That shop, I found out later, a very good friend of mine, my friend Robbie, who I grew up with, he worked there when we were like, kids. He worked there when he was 13 after school. And he told me later, I was like, how much did they pay you? And he was like, well, they paid me in store credit. And I said, oh, how much did they pay you in store credit? And he was like, 50 cents an hour. And I was like, in store credit? And he was like, yeah. I was like, oh, well, what was your discount on comics? And he was like, I didn't get a discount. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I'd work for like 4 hours and that would get me a book. And
that's like, prison wages.
Yeah. I was
this
like,
is amazing.
I was like, Robbie. And he was like, no, I know. I don't want to think about it. It was bad.
Chris, Olivia, Edwin, don't listen to this. That sounds like a great deal. We hooked up on a 100% credit system next week when you come in for your shifts. I think hey, look, that's what they do in New York. And I got to go with the big dogs on this.
No, that's fair.
So you were reading from a pretty young age, and you were picking up, kind of mainstream-ish superhero books. Star Wars, I think totally fits in that, especially that Marvel run. And at what point did you kind of start to put 2 and 2 together? It may have been really early for you because of your parents, but the fact that it's somebody's job to make the comics.
No, what's weird is that I didn't put that together. For me, other than my friend Robbie, who I wasn't that close to when I was a kid, I'm closer to him now, but I didn't have a lot of friends who read comics growing up. It was pretty much like the thing I would do when I'd go home from school. I'd grab some books and I'd read in my room, and I didn't have friends who I talked to about comics. And like, there were some kids at school who kind of liked comics, but not like I liked them. And so it just didn't really come up. And so for me, comics was always really solitary. And I think in that it existed in this weird world where like, I think when you're a kid, like you have a friend who likes music and you're like, we should start a band. You have a friend who likes the same movies as you and you're like, we should be actors. And I didn't have that to be like, I knew I couldn't draw, and then I just sort of checked out on it. I was just like, yeah, comics is just the thing I like. And it wasn't until years later that I sort of was like thinking about, I actually know when it was that I was reading 30 Days a Night when 30 Days a Night was coming out. And I read an interview with Steve Niles, and they were like, "Oh, Steve Niles used to play in punk bands, and he played in a band called Grey Matter, who I loved. They were before my time, but they were an old DC like post-hardcore band on Discord." And I was just like, and that was like the scene. I was like into music and bands, and I was like, the guy from Grey Matter's writing comics, and that to me was like a really big revelation of just like, how is that possible? Like, where is the connection there? Like, how did he do that? And that was a huge thing for me, like finding out. I told this story once on a panel with Steve, and he was like, "So you saw that I was making comics and you thought, oh, anyone can do that?" And I was like, no.
That's the right reaction as a
Yeah.
put yourself in your place real quick.
Yeah, but I mean, I was like, it never dawned on me that like to think about the process of it.
About how old were you? Do you remember at that point, like when you were?
I was like 20.
Yeah. So you were an adult for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And kind of what had you kind of set your career path on at that point? Were you thinking in terms of that? Were you in?
No, not at all. I was working in the music business. I worked in the music business for a long time, doing pretty much everything you can do that doesn't involve having musical ability of any kind. So I toured with bands. I roadied, I guitar teched, I tour managed, I sold merch, I did all that stuff. I booked tours, I put on shows in New York, and I ran a record label. Me and my girlfriend ran a record label out of our bedroom for 10 years. It was like, tiny indie label, but it paid for itself, and that was my job for a long time.
What's the label, Matt?
It was called Red Leader.
Red Leader.
It was like punk and hardcore and indie rock stuff.
Yeah.
If you were cued into certain scenes at a certain time, a couple of our bands did pretty well. And every once in a while, people at Comic Cons are like, "You put out the first Strike Anywhere record? That's crazy!" Or like, "You put out the Polar Bear Club record?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they like get real weird, but yeah.
There's a real look from people who care very passionately about things. I mean, there are all these circles that kind of overlay, and I definitely feel like there's a group of comics and music people.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, I think the mentality is 100% overlaps. I think like, every music record nerd kid I know and music kid I know is going to record shops and digging through the boxes of 7-inches and digging through the bins to find records, and it's exactly the same as comic collecting. And like, you even go down to like colored vinyl nerds versus variant cover nerds and all that stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, they're the same people. It's the same mentality. It just depends on what you're into. And it's actually one of the things that I really like about, I grew up in punk and hardcore, and that for me was always like really special to me because there's not really a lot of hero worship in that. There's when it's good, there's supposed to be no disconnect between the audience and the performers. And so like, you'd go see bands. I mean, a lot of my favorite bands slept on my couch. Like a lot of your favorite bands, when the show's over, are like, "Where's good to eat around here?" And you go get food with them. And that to me has always been something that I love about comics. It's like, it's not like, if I love a Tom Cruise movie, there's not really an avenue for me to go hang out with Tom Cruise, but
there's this organization you can join.
Well, sure. There's one avenue to go hang out with Tom Cruise.
I'll send you some information.
I would love that.
New York, you should be pretty close.
They have a
nice building in St. Petersburg.
They have a large building on 125th Street, not far from me.
I'm sure.
Very big.
You're in Manhattan, not in Brooklyn. They're in Manhattan, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, your label did better than mine. Mine made it one release.
Oh, not bad.
So hey, we were in a handful of stores. That was the thing that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I moved to comics, like I just hit a point where I was burned out on music, where the music industry is like so cutthroat and brutal, and and I started thinking about making comics, and my buddy Patrick, who's a front man in a band, and is, me and him are on the same wavelength a lot of time. Patrick Kinlan, he's a writer, who's doing a lot of awesome stuff. And he was someone that I was like, hey, we should write comics. And because he's a big comic book nerd, and he was like, how do we do that? And I was like, I don't know. And then like early on, I was like, we should publish our comics. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, there's only one distributor. Like when I put out records, we had, I think over the course of my label's 10-year career, we had 19 distributors, and 11 of them went out of business owing us money.
Yep.
And I was like, it's just Diamond. We just need to get books in a Diamond and we're good. And that to me was like, that's what we're going to do. And then I started doing it. I was like, oh no, I don't want to do the business. I just want to.
The process of getting a book in Diamond.
Oh yeah.
You don't know. It's not the most. It's more than putting a barcode on the book, guys. You got there's some extra legwork involved for all that, for sure. So hey, if your local comic shop wants to carry all these perfect crosses, they can reach out to us directly. Go to perfectcrosses.com. We're shipping them direct to your comic shop. We're cutting out the middleman. So I know, dude. That is not fun.
Yeah.
So what do you see when I talk to a lot of creators? It kind of, for so many people, it comes down to kind of who you know. It's like, oh, I met this person and they introduced me to that person. Was that kind of what your process was too, or was it more direct?
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I grew up touring with bands and traveling the country and sleeping on strangers' floors, that I was kind of like, I'm going to go to Comic-Cons. Like, I'm going to self-publish some books and go to Comic-Cons and just meet people. And I'm like kind of shy and don't really, and so I had to sort of train myself to be outgoing and to talk to people more. But I met a bunch of creators who were doing the same thing. I think the instinct of I meet a lot of young creators who are like, I try to be really friendly and open because a lot of my heroes were really friendly and open and available to me. But like, at the end of the day, like, you're better off finding peers and a peer group who you can actually support you. Like, I can't do a lot for someone who is, doesn't have a published book yet or doesn't have anything yet. I can do some introductions, but I can't like put them in the right places necessarily. I'll try when I can. But I think the big thing is like, I meet a lot of young creators who are like, oh, I want to meet Bendis, or I want to meet Scott Snyder, or I want to meet these people. And it's like, those are all really great, supportive, kind, wonderful people. Like, I can say that from experience. But also, those are people who have millions of people trying to meet them and get them books and ask for favors. And like, for me, I had a lot of people who were bigger than me give me breaks and help me out. But like, my peer group when I started was Frank Barberi, who wrote Five Ghosts at Image and did a bunch of stuff in Marvel and DC, and he's one of my very close friends. And Patrick Kinlan, like I said, who's doing a bunch of stuff at Aftershock and stuff at Black Mask. And then like Ed Brisson, who was at Marvel with me, and Steve Orlando. I came up with Steve, and a ton of writers like that. An artist too, like Brian Level and Adam Gorham and Michael Walsh and all these artists who like no one had published work or people had a comic. And so we do like, hey, let's go to Chicago Comic Con and, we'll get a hotel room and we'll put 12 people in it and we'll all, 2 people sleep in the bathroom, 2 people in each bed, and everyone else is on the floor. Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. Like, it's funny because it's like, people are always like, oh, how do you, like when me and Ed Brisson were writing Uncanny X-Men, people were like, oh, how do you guys know each other? And we're like, oh, we just know each other for a long time. And then I say like, oh, we used to sleep in hotel rooms that it was like me and Ed in a bed and, like Frank Barberi in a bed with Mike Walsh and, like 14 of us, 15 of us. And that's, the group of people, Mike Morisi, who does a lot of awesome stuff now, is doing Star Wars stuff. Like, those are the guys that really caught my back and who I tried to catch their back coming up because we were all in the same place. And that I think was a big deal.
So you really credit the self-published stuff and showing up and putting that in people's hands as kind of being the break.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, it's hard because no one reads that stuff. Like, it's really hard to get people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to get people to read it. Every time someone brings me like something that I self-published, I'm kind of shocked and just like, why do you have this? Why do you? I understand that I sold some at conventions, but like, why do you still have it? Like, how did you remember to dig it out of a box? But yeah, I mean, I meet so
with a 9.6.
yeah. Oh yeah, I get those. I'm just like, oh, I'd rather this be in the slab than be read. I guarantee that. But the I meet so many people who are like, I have these ideas and I want to write X-Men, and it's like that's just not how it works. Like you can't do that. And
Well,
I,
this would be a good chance to bring in Jason. So, like, as a fan and as a reader, Jason, I'm sure it's crossed your mind, especially as an adult, of what it might be like to have some level of agency and control in the destiny of these characters.
Oh yeah. I've actually gone to the point of actually writing out some like Moon Knight scripts of like where I think Moon Knight should go. Never so much as to presume that Spider-Man or X-Men, but I have written out some Moon Knight scripts.
I love that. I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna write Spider-Man, but I'll write a Moon Knight.
Right.
I
can do a Moon Knight.
If Lemire doesn't want it, or if Matt doesn't want it, I'll write the Moon Knight book.
Moon Knight's the best, man.
That's my new project after I filled in my holes for Spider-Man. So I'm trying to get every issue of Moon Knight in his own series, and God, it's impossible because there's so many of them.
Yeah.
It's one of those
easier than Spider-Man though.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
That's
cheap.
True.
Yeah.
It's gonna save you some money in the long run. That's for sure.
Well, at least until the Oscar Isaac series comes out.
Yeah. You have like 5 months to really get them all.
Clock is ticking.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I'm a big fan of, like I mentioned at the top of the piece here, of We Can Never Go Home, of Four Kids, like your smaller press, the Black Mask stuff, and I mean, how do you see that fitting in with the big press superhero stuff that you have done and have continued to be kind of in the world of? Do you see that as a part of that trajectory too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think anyone at Marvel or DC cared about my self-published stuff, and I tried to make them care. I don't think it ever. There's one editor, my friend Rachel, who was at Marvel for a while and was at DC for a while. She was the only editor I ever got to read my self-published stuff, and she was like, "You're great. You should work here." And then she left Marvel, and I was like, "Oh,
right,
Rachel." But she's still my very good friend, and so I made a friend where I didn't get a job, and that's the important thing. But yeah, I doing the stuff at Black Mask. I did. My first real published book, I did a book with RZA and Ghostface Killah from the Wu-Tang Clan.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. Oh, don't worry.
And that is someone, I went into that book and was like, this is going to be a big deal. Like, this is going to be cool. Like, I'm not doing this like a crappy, rap comic cash in. Like, I'm getting cool artists to do stuff, and like, it's neat, and it's sort of cutting edge and like kind of an avant-garde weird thing. It's also kind of a mess, but it is it is that. And I was just sure, I was like, oh, Marvel's going to call me tomorrow when this book comes out. Like, it comes out on Wednesday.
Friends with RZA now, and
yeah. I mean, what's funny is that like I used to go and hang out with RZA in the studio, and he was always like, why isn't there a Shang-Chi book? And I'd be like, yeah, I don't know why there's not a Shang-Chi book now. And he's like, we should do a Shang-Chi book. And I would email Marvel and be like, hey, RZA wants to do a Shang-Chi book. Can I do that? And they just wouldn't even respond because, like, who the hell was I? But they didn't care about that. But then the book did well. And I was doing stuff at Black Mask, and I was actually working there as my day job. I was doing like marketing and press stuff for them, and
I didn't realize that. Yeah, so you had a real in with the publisher.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I was handling a lot of that. I was doing social media marketing and retail outreach for Black Mask, like at the beginning.
It's the same with I was on the phone with Scout last week, and the person I'm talking to in retail outreach is, oh, and by the way, my book is coming out. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Sure,
Like,
yeah.
it's true. Like, I kind of love that. There's something really charming about that in a very sincere way.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
That these are people who work in comics and they love it so much they're making, not just physically making them, but creatively making them too.
Yeah, I mean, I was working to pay for art on my books. I was working in a comic shop and working at Black Mask, part-time, and then I left my comic shop job. And the comic shop job I'd worked at enough that I put out there that I was like, when I was fired from my comic shop job.
Actual money and not just credit. I mean, that 50
yeah,
cents an hour in credit.
Yeah, no, I got paid. Not great, but I got paid. But I left, and I remember posting on Facebook, and I was like, I want to go full time into like marketing and stuff for comics. And I had, I'd worked with enough publishers at the shop in New York that I was at that I had 3 job offers by the end of the day from publishers, and I was like, oh, I could do this.
See, over and over again, the lesson here is, as I talk to all these people who have made wonderful careers in comic books or just in life, is number one, be a nice person. Be someone that somebody wants to be around. That's like the best life advice anyway. And then if you're passionate about what you do or what you want to do, like being a nice person is like 90% of it. Where somebody can be like, oh, I want to work with that person. Maybe they don't have exactly the skill set or whatever else, but I think that we could do something because they are nice.
Yeah. I worked at a shop in New York, and I mean, I don't think it's telling tales out of school. Most of the people who worked at this company are gone now. But when I left, I was actually going to go work at Valiant.
Yeah.
And I was going to be the number 2 sales guy at Valiant. And it went really far. And I'd never done that job particularly. But they were like, you're one of the top salesmen at one of the biggest comic shops in New York. Like, we figure you can probably sell comics to retailers. Like, you can at least talk on their level because you did this for a couple of years. And I was going to take the job, and then at the last minute, I literally went in. I had 5 job interviews at Valiant, and on my 5th interview, they were like, "This is just a formality to meet everybody." Yeah. And in the last interview, one of the owners was like, who's not the company anymore, was like, "Just so you know, I know you're like trying to be a writer too." And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "If you work for us, you can't write for other people." And I was like, "Oh." And he was like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, you can't, like, we can't have our employees writing at other companies."
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, "That makes sense." And he was like, "Yeah, so go ahead and sign the contract." And I was like, "I'm going to wait a little bit on this." And I left, and I was walking the subway, and my cell phone rang, and the head of sales at Valiant was like, "I just lost you, didn't I?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to try and write." And I said, "But I have a guy." And it was the other salesman at my old shop. Yeah. And he is the head of sales at Valiant now, Matthew Klein.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, but you made the call, like, I'm going to trust myself and trust what my art is going to be. And
yeah.
And I think that's really tough. And I think that's another good lesson for people kind of starting out, that if you know what your end game is, if you really have a handle on it, then make decisions that get you toward your end game.
Yeah, I think the way I always frame it, because I tell the story and it sounds more romantic than it is, but the bottom line is, like, it's not romantic at the time. It's a commitment to being broke, and it's a commitment to knowing that the thing you want to do in the future is more important than your comfort now.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. Like, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to turn down a good job and do like freelance comic retail marketing for a year and try and figure out if I can pay my rent and stuff. And like, I stopped buying comics. I used to play video games a lot. I sold all my video games. I sold a bunch of my record collection because I was like, I want to make comics. That's what I want to do. And people would be like, oh, we're going to go out to these movies. I was like, I can't go out to movies. That's $15. Like, I don't have that. Like, and it wasn't glorious or glamorous. It wasn't just like I'm turning down job offers because I'm going to be a Marvel writer. It was like I'm turning down job offers because I'm going to give it my all and see where it ends up. And the story is really depressing if I don't do okay, but I did. So
Of course, it worked out. But I'm curious, what kind of books did your parents or do your parents write? I mean, what is their genre or what is their, kind of?
So my dad passed away recently, but that's okay. He wrote a bunch of crime novels, 9 crime novels, and an essay on the 19th century, like a dissertation on the 19th century populist thinker Thomas Carlyle. But mostly my dad was a TV writer.
Okay.
He's the most prolific TV movie writer in history.
What?
Yeah.
All right.
He has a little.
Are one of us, at some point we grew up watching one of those on Friday night on ABC or whatnot.
Yeah. People are always like, "Oh, did he write?" And then they say something really popular. But my dad was of the opinion, and he used to tell writers this all the time, was like, "Don't do the the Amy Fisher movie, like the Flash in the Pan one, because then you seem like a novelty.
Yeah.
Like, do the things that they're not going to know what it is. That's actually a compelling drama. That like you can do 100 of those, or you can do 2 Amy Fisher movies and have the flashy thing, and then no one will hire you because they're like, well, I don't want my thing to be like trashy like the Amy Fisher one. And so my dad ended up doing all these movies, and no one ever is like, did he do this one? And I'm always like, no. But he did. He's done more than anyone else, according to the Writers Guild. Wow. And yeah, and he wrote a bunch of network TV.
And what about your mom? She was also.
My mom was an editor for a long time. She only wrote one thing that ever got made. She wrote a movie. She wrote a slasher film in 1980 called Maniac.
Still pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, like as far as parental jobs go, writing a slasher film is right up there.
Yeah. It's a terrible film. It is, I believe, Gene Siskel called it a tour de force in misogyny.
Hey, he talked about it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's actually the funny thing about my mom's. I mean, every once in a while, like people love the movie. Like it is a beloved film. It is truly atrocious and like stomach churning movie. But when the movie came out and was testing early, it was so violent and like kind of reprehensible that the producers came to my mom and they were like, do you have a middle, her name's Charlotte. And they said, do you have a middle name? And she said, yeah. And they said, what's your middle initial? And she said, A. And they're like, could we credit you as C.A. Rosenberg? And she said, why? And they were like, we don't want people to know a woman wrote this. We want to lean into like how intensely misogynistic it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's the late 70s, early 80s for you. So yeah.
Another family question for you.
Yes.
I was rereading the LR Amazing Spider-Man issues, and in the title page of the first one of those, I noticed another Rosenberg there. Was that coincidence, or is that someone you're related to?
No, that would be Rochelle, who's a colorist, and we are not related, although I've worked with her a bunch. She's great. She's one of my favorite colorists at Marvel. All the time, people bring me her books to sign and bring her books, my books to her, and we're always like, no. And all the time, people are like, are you guys married? And we're like, no. And she has a husband, and I met him, and he's great. And they're like, are you brother and sister? And we're like, and they don't believe it, and it's great.
There couldn't possibly be 2 Rosenbergs working.
Right.
I had a guy who literally at a convention was like, you must be related. And I was like, no, we're not. And he was like, you must be. And I was like, we're not. And he's like, how could you not be? And I was like, what kind of weird question is that? We're not. And then he was like, I don't believe it. And I was like, hey, man, what's your last name? And he was like, Johnson. And I was like, oh, this could not be better that this guy, whose last name is the most common last name in America, does not believe it. But yeah.
Yeah, so Don Johnson is your dad. I get it.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
I point out to people all the time, I was like, there are currently 3 Thompsons writing at Marvel. There's Kelly, Robbie, and Zach.
Yeah, that's right. That's
and I hate all 3 of them.
Oh, okay, good. I'll get Zach back on next week. We'll have him talk about that. Well, what was your so you did some independent stuff, you did some self-published stuff. Mm-hmm. What was your first book that you did for the big 2 for Marvel and DC? What was the first thing you kind of got in the side door on? Yeah,
I when the first issue of We Can Never Go Home came out, the week it came out, an editor named Jake Thomas, who was my editor on all 27 issues of Punisher I wrote, is my editor on Thunderbolts, is one of the best editors in comics, bar none, and one of my favorite people. Emailed me out of the blue, and he was like, "Do you want to do a 10-page story in Secret Wars Journal #1?"
More than anything.
I was like, "I don't know what that is," and yes, I do. And so that's what it was. I did a 10-page X-Men story in Secret Wars Journal #1. It was a very weird experience because he was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "X-Men." And he was like, "Okay, you can do whatever." And
See, Jason, you can just tell him what you want to do. And
you just tell him. That's fine. It's like a buffet. Working at Marvel's like a buffet. But you already said Moon Knight, so now you're not going to get to write Spider-Man.
You're stuck.
Right. Come in as a guest and then maybe jump over that way.
Yeah, you're just going to be the Moon Knight writer, though.
Sorry.
But the
hey, he's got multiple personalities. Okay,
yeah, that's true. Spider-Man was in the Bendis Moon Knight run, sort of. Eventually. Yeah. So yeah, I did an X-Men story.
Were you reading like X-Men or Marvel at the time, or did you have to like get a packet no, this is what you have to figure out?
No, I'm a super voracious Marvel reader.
Love it.
I started a project. I didn't talk about this for a long time, and now I talk about it. I started a project years and years ago that I would read everything Marvel published starting in the year 1999 and just go.
Whoa. Why 99? What was the
99 is just a really good. I sort of looked at all the eras and I was like, it's a really good time. It's like Joe Quesada coming in and Marvel Knights starting, but like also Kurt Busiek, George Perez Avengers, which I really wanted to like dive into again. There's just so much good stuff going on, like David Mack Daredevil starting right around there, Bendis Daredevil. There's just a lot of cool stuff. It's just a great, it leads into just so much that I really was excited to dive into. So I was like, I'm just going to pick a time arbitrarily. And so I read everything. So like, yeah, I read stuff as it comes out still. And like, I know what's going on because it's my job, but like, I have very specific windows. I mean, I've been a Marvel fan my whole life, so I can talk about like, 60s Marvel and 70s Marvel, but like, I have this weird window where people will be like, mention a certain thing and I'll be like, oh, well, that was this and this and this, because I've literally read all of that like in chronological order of how it happens. So I'm very weird about it.
Well, Marvel's not the only publisher that you work for.
No.
And so we should give some equal time to the other half of the big two, because you've got some cool stuff coming out.
Yeah. I'd only ever done one comic at DC. I did a fill-in issue of Black Canary for the DCU stuff. I did Black Canary #9, which is a standalone weird issue, and that was it. I did that issue and then signed exclusive to Marvel.
Yeah,
and just couldn't work there. And now I'm like trying to branch out and do some more stuff. So some cool opportunities came up at DC that I was really excited about. And so I was on the phone with Ben Abernathy, who's the head of the Batman group, and just a great editor and a great guy. And he was like, what kind of stuff do you like and all this stuff. And I was listing characters I like and stuff. And I was just like, I really love Grifter and the Wildcats. And he was like, did you say Grifter? And I was like, yeah, I love Grifter.
Okay, so you said Grifter. Okay.
I said Grifter, and I didn't realize that Ben was Ben was a Wildstorm editor. He'd been a Wildstorm before he was the head of the Batman group. And so I really I think James Tynion later was like, you really just like kissing his butt there with that one. I was like, no, I didn't know that he would like, be super amped that someone said Grifter on a phone call. And he was just like, what would you want to do with Grifter? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, we started talking, and then he was like, Grifter's going to appear in an issue of Batman. Yeah. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And he was like, we don't know what's happening with him after that. And I was like, okay. And he was like, let's figure it out. And then from there, I just hit the ground running. So I just did I did issues 1 and 3. I co-wrote of Future State Dark Detective, which is
It's right over there.
It's right over there. It's Bruce Wayne by Mariko Tamaki and Dan Mora. But then me and Carmine DiGomenico did Grifter. And that story wrapped up was just 2 issues to show you that Grifter's going to be in Gotham in 5 years, and now we're going back those 5 years or however many years it is.
It's only 5. Good God.
It's a nebulous amount of time, I believe.
Everything's like everything exists at once now at
Sure.
DC. It's cool. Don't worry about it. If you like it, it's canon. If you don't, it's not.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, I like that. It's a little smorgasbord. It's fun. But so now, next month we are doing a book called Batman Urban Legends, and I am doing Grifter in Gotham with Ryan Benjamin, who was a Wildstorm artist and did the Grifter Midnighter book years ago. And he's just great. And then my buddy Chip Zdarsky is doing a Red Hood story in that, and it's a big book. I'm doing 22 pages of Grifter every month. Chip is doing 22 pages of Red Hood, and then there's 2 other stories in there.
A 64-page giant or whatever.
Yeah, 64-page giant. That's great.
So no, I'm so excited for that. I was a DC kid growing up. I mean, it's what I had easy access to. And you talked about being a Marvel kid growing up.
Sure.
I mean, everybody knows Batman, right?
Yeah.
But did you ever pick up any of those?
Oh, sure.
Early 80s detective? And,
oh, yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Batman fan. Like, I love Batman.
And Grifter, I mean, like, so when the when the 90s was in full swing, were you...
I was a kid and I was reading that Marvel stuff, and then when all those guys went and did Image, I was like, I'm going with them. And most of the time I trickled back to Marvel and was like, that wasn't for me. But Jim Lee.
Yeah, I bought all those #1s, but then didn't stick with all of them.
Yeah, that's sort of how I was. For me, like, there's a lot of stuff now that I've actually gone back and appreciated more. The early stuff is real weird. But Wildstorm to me always just worked really well, just because Jim, one, is so smart about what he does, but also, like, when you look at it now, what he was doing of just like starting a book, setting it up, establishing it, and then leaving it to other people. And so it's just like like he's on Wildcats, and then it's like, oh, it's Travis Charest drawing it, and you're like, oh, this is beautiful too. And then it's like James Robinson is writing it, and Alan Moore is writing it, and all these awesome people are coming in and doing it. It's just really fun. And he's off doing Gen 13, and he's off doing all these other books that, like, planting seeds. And so the Wildstorm universe is something that I've always just really loved, because I think it's really, it's more of a universe than anyone else had. It's not, the Spawn universe wasn't.
I've always been a huge Barry Windsor Smith fan. I love that they brought him in to do work on that, way back.
Oh yeah, the Barry Windsor Smith stuff is great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was money to go around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get the sense that this was like a lot of, I mean, Chris Claremont's coming in and doing issues of Wildcats, and also there's just a level of, like, totally not caring about anything, like not being afraid of anything. That's amazing. Where you're just like, oh, are Cyclops and Jean Grey on this boat that the Wildcats are on? And then does it blow up and they die? And you're just like, yep, that's what he did. He just killed them. And there's just a ton of stuff like that. That's just super fun. So yeah,
deadlines, didn't care about IP.
Yeah. Speaking of super fun, I want to bring this up because this is a book I wouldn't say happened upon. I was going back and I told you I reread the LR issues, and I was re-listening to the Amazing Spider Talk podcast reviews of those. And in them, I'm not sure if you ever listened to those guys, but I love them. Dan Gavosdin was talking about your Hawkeye, and he was just gushing over it. And so I picked that up yesterday, and I'm not done with it, but I love it too. I mean, that's just such a fun book, man.
Thank you.
And the art's great on it. I think you're writing in the art from Otto Schmidt. I've never seen his work before. He's a new favorite of mine. And so I just wanted to tell you how fun that was and how much I enjoyed it. And I just literally discovered it yesterday.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was like sort of a dream book for me. I'm a big Hawkeye fan. I was a big West Coast Avengers guy, so like Hawkeye and the solo stuff, like the Mark Grunwald Hawkeye mini is like an all-time favorite, and then the Matt Fraction David Aja stuff, and yeah, I just always loved Hawkeye, and I love, there's some Marvel characters that are cool because they're cool, and there's some Marvel characters that are cool because the creators put in the work to make them cool, and Hawkeye I feel like is in the latter category, where it's like, inherently he's not a cool idea. He's like a guy in purple who like shoots arrows and came from the circus.
Yeah.
But like just the work is there to really make him matter. Whereas like, there's other characters where you're like, that's just a cool looking guy and he'll be popular and it doesn't really matter that he's not cool. but I really do like love Clint and who he is, and so that was something that I've been, you know, trying to do for a long time. So I was really happy to get to do it. So I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, well, if you do more, I'll be there. So that was great.
Also, chiming in there. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Over on YouTube, watching live right now.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And Freefall was honestly, I knew about, especially the Black Mask stuff I was aware of, but as we were in the process of opening up our shop, we're still a pretty new shop.
Sure.
And I was talking to Jermaine at Acme Comics in Greensboro.
He's the best.
And at that time, he was, you know, it was ramping up for Freefall because we were open by the time it was coming out. And he was like, oh, that is the best. Like he is just so supportive of us and of retailers, and he just gets it like a lot of other people don't get it. And so I was like, okay, note to self, whenever I can talk to Matt Rosenberg, I'm going to do that.
Well, that's awesome, and thank you to Lord Retail. But the yeah, I mean, I always tell people, like, you know, my feeling on comics is that, I mean, it's what I talked about before with the punk rock, that like there's no separation. Like, I'm in my comic shop every week buying comics. I mean, I'm not now because I don't leave my house, so I'm mail ordering comics every week. But
thank you, by the way. Matt placed a very nice order down at Neighborhood, and that let me know how to sneak up on him via email.
Sure, thank you for the books. But yeah, I mean, I always feel like, you know, like people who work at publishers, people who work in comic shops, people who make comics, and fans, like, we're all one step apart from the other. Like, you know, I've been to shops where people, you know, freak out and are like, oh my God, I can't believe you're here. And I'm like, man, I had your job 5 years ago, and I could have your job again in 2 years. Like, you could have my job next year. Like, let's not be weird about it. Like, we can just talk about comics.
So we're gonna get you down here. We'll do something with SCAD. We'll get you down here.
I would love to. I love it down there.
And then we'll make that happen. So Jason, we're gonna go to a couple of questions that have come in through Facebook and YouTube. And while we're doing that, I want you to think about how we're gonna close out specific Spidey or X questions you've probably got on your.
I've got something real specific I can go with.
Oh God.
Okay, well, we'll save it for just a second.
Okay.
Derek, regular of the shop here. Shout out for your Thunderbolts run.
Oh, thank you.
Nice.
I'm a big Thunderbolts fan. It's, you know, it's rare to be a comic fan where like a title comes along at this point in your lifetime that matters. Like, so many of the titles are legacy and existed before you're born. And Thunderbolts is a book that, like, I was a reader when the Thunderbolts happened, and I was like, oh wow. So it's really like a prestige title for me, and I just love everything. And I sort of love. It's funny because someone said to me on Twitter, they're like, I really like your Thunderbolts book. It doesn't feel like a Thunderbolts book to me though. And I just thought about it, and I was like, I don't even really know what that means. Like, this is a title that, like, by design reinvents itself all the time. Like, this book for 6 issues was about an underground fighting ring. Like, you know, it's been superheroes, it's been villains, it's been they become the Dark Avengers. It's just always a different thing. And so I was like, I don't know, this feels like Thunderbolts to me as much as anything, but, you know.
Well, I think as a fan of the culture, you probably get it. Sometimes when you speak to people that you admire, you don't end up saying it the right way.
Sure.
Right? So I would probably hold on to that and walk away with it. It was.
Oh no! I mean, he was super nice, and it was super complimentary. And I'm of the opinion, like, if you don't like my stuff, like, that's fine. Like, I feel bad. I'm sorry you spent $4 on a thing and you didn't like it, but like, not everything's for everyone, and that's okay. Like, thanks for giving it a chance. So I'm never super offended when someone was like, I read this thing you did and I didn't like it. I'm like, okay, sorry. Like, you know what? I cooked dinner last night and I didn't like it. I'm not mad at myself for that. It's just how it is sometimes.
Our next question is from Johnny Party 99, who's been watching on YouTube tonight. What's up, Johnny Party 99?
Hey, John.
Matthew, if you had to pick one single issue, so one 22-pager thereabouts, that you've written and would consider your favorite single issue, what would it be and why? A single issue, that's tough. I could see an arc or, anything like some of your creator and stuff in particular, being like, oh, I really enjoyed that, but single issue.
The first issue, We Can Never Go Home, is really special to me because it's my thing that's published, and people really got it and liked it in a way that caught me off guard. The first issue of 4Kids is like one of my favorite things that I've ever written. Me and Tyler, who drew it, worked really hard on that, and I'm really proud of it. But then, so like both of those are at the top of the heap. After that, you know, I probably have a different answer every day, but for me, like Uncanny X-Men 11, the first issue that was just me writing out without Kelly and Ed, and it was Cyclops trying to find the X-Men and the return, and Wolverine, and Cyclops and Wolverine meeting up. That was like a very, Uncanny X-Men is my favorite book my whole life, and that was like pretty intense to get to write that, and pretty emotional. And I was dealing with some like heavy stuff in my life, and just like dealing with that and getting that book and seeing it was really like a surreal, beautiful thing. And I hold on to that book pretty close.
Oh, that's a great answer. I'm really curious, and this kind of leads me into this thought. But I mean, you have at Marvel in particular, you have co-written or have a co-writing credit on several books. I mean, what is that like when you're brought into? I'm sure it's different book to book and co-writer to co-writer, but you know, in those kind of instances, what is that vibe like? Is it a jam, or are you just kind of filling in stuff, or how does that generally?
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that, yeah, I'm really interested in the mechanics of that as well, especially with Nick Spencer on Amazing Spider-Man. He's got this 50-issue opus he's in the middle of.
Yeah. How
does that work when you come in to write those LR issues?
Yeah, so it's different on everything. It depends on the writer. I'm trying to think of all the stuff I've co-written. I co-wrote 10 issues of Uncanny with Kelly Thompson at Brisson. I co-wrote a bunch of the Marvel Knights stuff with Donnie Cates, and Annihilation, the Annihilation event, I sort of co-wrote. I'm not credited as co-writing it, I don't think. I don't think I have credits on it, but I did. I outlined the whole series, like it's all my.
I feel like you do, at least on maybe the trades or something.
Maybe on the trade, I don't know. But it was different each time. Marvel's sort of a see what works, and you guys sort it out. We'll step away. So like, Uncanny X-Men was interesting because me and Kelly and Ed are really close. Like we're very good. Like I talk to Kelly and Ed every day. Still. So like that was a weird thing because we definitely were sitting there. I mean, they flew Kelly and Ed into New York, and we had meetings in the office for 2 days, and would go out to dinners and talk about the book, and we were just talking about it for 15 hours a day, and then we went home and we're on the phone and all that. But we decided to each sort of split the book up into a third and do 1/3 of it, which is a really weird and difficult way to do it.
Well, it's kind of I've got friends who are showrunners and are screenwriters. I know that like Hollywood writer rooms are often done that way. Like you'll get together in a team and you break the first act to the second act. Yeah, that was sort of our idea, was to be like, but the problem was there was no showrunner. So it ended up with a lot of like kind of heated like whatever. And I tend to be like a little more Kelly is very passionate and very like has like really strong favorites that she loves, and I have favorites and Ed has favorites, but Kelly would just be like, I really want to write X-23. I'd be like, okay, like that. And I was always just like, I'll write what, and Ed was always like, I want to write Glob, and I was like, I'll write whatever you guys don't write. Like write your 2/3 of the book and then give it to me and I'll write the other third. I don't care. Every X-23 and Glob story, and then I guess we'll put Wolverine in this one too? Question mark.
And I think in hindsight, like all of us would have a different way of doing the book if we did it again, but I don't think we'd agree on what that different way was, so I don't think we'd get anywhere with that. With Marvel Knights, that was just me and Donnie over 2 days, just on the phone figuring out what the story was. He was like, hey, I agreed to do this Marvel Knights book and I don't have time to do it. And I was like, okay. And he was like, I told him you were going to do it with me. And I was like, I don't have time to do that either. And he was like, let's just figure it out. And I was actually in LA, and I remember I was sitting on a street corner outside my buddy's house because I didn't want to wake him at 5 a.m, still on the phone with Donnie talking about Marvel Knights, and a bunch of coyotes came out from behind a house and were wrestling in the street, and Donnie was like, what the hell is that noise? And I was like, there's coyotes fighting in front of me. And he was like, in your apartment in Manhattan? And I was like, no, I'm in LA. And he was like, oh, okay. And that was just whatever. But for Spider-Man, to get to your question, Jason, Spider-Man is very different because Nick is the captain of the Spider-Man ship. And
Right.
he, Nick asked for me to do it. I'm good buddies with Nick, and a lot of what he had planned, like, we'd just jump on the phone and talk about, like, and go over, and I'd heard him go over it in the room. And I think we have similar sensibilities on a lot of stuff, and like he likes the way I do certain things and hates the way I do certain things. And so he was like, yeah, I thought you'd be good because you have certain skill sets that would be very good for this. And so he brought me in, and then he was kind of like, yeah, just, run with it. And then I started coming up with stuff, and he was like, no, that's not going to work because of this and this, and that's not going to work because of this and this. And I was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, we really need to work closer on this. I can't just run with this, man. And in the end, he's really good with story and just figuring out big picture stuff. So a lot of the big picture stuff, he just was like, this is how this should work. And then he'd just leave stuff open and be like, how do you do this? And then I went and scripted it, and he went in and cleaned it up and made it make sense. I mean, a lot of the stuff with Norman is so tied into like the core title books that he's like, you can't really touch.
Right.
Like, he's like, just leave Norman's dialogue blank. Like, I'll touch it. I'll handle it, because he's got to be talking a specific way and doing a specific thing. And a lot of the Kindred stuff was that too. That I was like, yeah, I don't know.
I've got to know who put in the 12 Angry Men reference, and how many readers did you think were going to get that?
I feel like the 12 Angry.
I loved it. I'm just wondering, like, just trying to think of like the demographics of who's reading it. Like, I mean,
Sure.
The movie came out in 1957, I think.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about that.
I actually don't know who put the reference in. I know the reference you're talking about.
Let me get Nick on the phone.
I want to say it was me, because that's my dad's favorite movie of all time.
Okay.
But I actually think it was Nick, and I just was like, oh, funny. Someone on Twitter was like, I love that you wrote this Ghostbusters thing, because there's a Ghostbusters joke, and then there's a second Ghostbusters joke.
Yeah, there's a callback to it. Yeah.
And then there's a callback to it, and I was like, I didn't write the Ghostbusters jokes. I wrote the callback, because Nick did and I was like, and I called him, and I was like, you wrote 2 Ghostbusters jokes for a 16-year-old to say. Actually, I think Spider-Woman says I'm not. I think there was a point when it was Spider-Girl who said them, and I was like, Spider-Girl.
I've seen that.
Yeah, I was like, Spider-Girl's not going to say. And so I think they were switched to Spider-Woman. I was like, this doesn't make sense. And then I was like, we have to acknowledge that there's 2 Ghostbusters jokes in this. Like, we can't just drive past that.
Because one character says, "Did you just actually make another Ghostbusters joke?" Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's evergreen. We got a couple other questions. I'm not sure if this is a question so much as a statement. Is Roboto Someone Six one of your friends, Matt? Because
I don't know. No, not that I know of.
The Avengers are not heroes. They are a disgrace to superheroes everywhere. The Aquabats, now those guys are real superheroes.
I went on tour with the Aquabats for 5 days, six days. I wasn't on tour with them. I was on tour with another band, and it was Less Than Jake, Blink-182, and the Aquabats. And it was right when Blink-182. I'm friends with a lot of the Less Than Jake guys, or I'm friends with Less Than Jake, and I just would jump in their bus sometimes and ride with them and hang out. And I was like, oh, this seems like a fun tour. And the opening bands were really cool. And but that was the tour where Travis Barker went from being the Aquabats drummer to Blink-182's drummer. Blink-182's drummer had to step away, and they were like, we need a fill-in drummer, like, we're on tour. And Travis was like, oh, I know how to do all your parts. And I had no
idea he was in the Aquabats.
Oh yeah, he was the drummer for the Aquabats. And he did both. And I remember standing on the side of the stage with someone in Less Than Jake watching Travis play the Blink-182 songs, and the crowd going crazy. And one of the members of Less Than Jake went, looks like the Aquabats are about to need a new drummer. And sure enough, like, Travis left pretty soon. I don't know how soon after, but
that's so funny. And I am of an age that I know the Aquabats solely from Yo Gabba Gabba. So, all right.
Sure.
Roboto also wanted to let you know that he loves sexy robots.
Sexy robots are pretty great.
Yeah.
Sure. Who
They
doesn't like them?
also hate sexism and racism and homophobia. So thank
I
you
hate
very
those
much
things too. Those are bad things.
That's a safe statement.
Thanks for
Yeah.
tuning in to let us know that. Oh,
It would be a real twist if I was like, I really like those things. That would really ruin the
I
moment.
told you this was just gonna be a hangout, but I'm really trying to trap you in some real Me Too business and get you canceled.
Some of the most basic. Be like, what do you think about sexism, Matt? Are you in favor of it? And I was like, well, you know.
Have you seen
No.
Maniac?
No, I don't like sexism and racism and homophobia. I think all of those things are terrible. I'm with you, Roboto.
And Johnny Party, who I'm sure was paying attention earlier, just wanted to make sure you are not related to Rochelle Rosenberg.
Yeah, I'm her dad. That's my daughter.
That's perfect, man. Jason, what is your big wrap up?
Okay, I'm just gonna say that I've read a good bit of your stuff here over the past couple of days, and one of the things I noticed across all of it that I really enjoyed was I think you have a real talent for, I guess, what I'd call adversarial banter.
Okay.
So basically, like Hawkeye versus everybody.
Sure.
Black Cat and Doctor Strange, MJ and Norman Osborn. Maybe you didn't write that part, but also Maddie and Duncan in We Can Never Go Home. So I just noticed that was a really strong point of yours. It's always very enjoyable to hear that dialogue.
Thank you.
And do you think that comes from maybe your dad's movie writing, or where does your ear for that dialogue come from? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, before I was a writer, I used to sit and listen. My dad was big on, you say all your dialogue out loud. You make sure that you can say it and it doesn't make you cringe when you say it. And so I used to, like when I was a little kid, I used to sit in his office and I'd play records. I'd put on actual 12-inch records and listen to them. And he'd be typing on his computer and just talking to himself and saying the dialogue. And so I do that. I do it really quietly so I don't drive my girlfriend or the people in the coffee shop nuts, but I say everything out loud always. Like there's not a line in a comic book of mine that hasn't been uttered by me under my breath in some way. But yeah, I think dialogue is I've said this before and sort of gotten poo-pooed for it, but dialogue is the most important part of a comic, besides the art. It's the most important part of writing a comic. And I think people don't think that and don't realize that in a lot of ways, or don't agree with it. But like dialogue is the window to character. It's who you are. It's how you represent yourself. And dialogue and action. So like dialogue coupled with art is really the definition of like who these characters are. And we all love big splash pages and double page spreads and big action moments. But if you look at the history of humankind and human storytelling, it's spoken word, and it's oral histories, and it's theater. And that's what storytelling has been for the existence of humanity, is just talking. And I think there are a lot of comics writers who are like focus on high concept and focus on internal monologue and things like that, and or art and action or all these other things. And to me, it's always like dialogue and character come first. Like I will read, I'm one of those guys who's like, I love Brian Bendis dialogue. I just think he's amazing. And like some of my favorite issues are, people are always like, oh, he's writing people in a coffee shop. And I'm like, I would read a book called Brian Bendis Puts the Avengers in a Coffee Shop. Like I would read that as an ongoing book. Like
I love his page dialogue spreads and powers. I love those.
Oh, love it. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. I mean, I always point to one of my favorite moments in all of superhero comics is the unveiling of the Dark Avengers, the press conference where they unveil, where Norman Osborn brings out the Dark Avengers, and the new Avengers, the real Avengers, are watching on TV. And they're discussing who everyone is and trying to figure it out. And it's the best. He captures who everyone is so well and so perfectly, like Spider-Man like making the jokes and Wolverine like just not saying anything, and just like how they're all dealing with it, and Clint is like super upset and is like, we're gonna go kill them. And then like when they do have that moment where they're like, who's the Wolverine? And Wolverine's like, that's my kid. And they all just stop and turn and look at him. It's such a good moment. And it's like, yeah, I want to read that much more than I want to read the fight scene that comes after that. Like they're both important, they both matter, but like that to me is what makes me feel connected to the characters. And that's what makes me come back to these comics all the time. And it goes back to, the Stan and the classic writers that really got that stuff. Like you read the original Spider-Man, you read the original Fantastic Four, the original X-Men, the way they talk, the way they interact with each other is so inherent to who they are more than anything else that so yeah, I put all my effort into making sure the dialogue is good. And sometimes
it really shows.
Thank you. Sometimes people are like, I hate the way you write these characters. And I'm like, that's fine. But like, it doesn't have to connect with everyone. But for me,
people who are just like,
oh, have you never been on Twitter?
no, please.
It's it's the Wild West. No, I just think like, yeah, I really appreciate the question, but yeah, I'm a big dialogue guy, and and it goes to TV and film and the stuff I like. I'm like, Mamet and Aaron Sorkin and Tarantino and whoever it is, like the way they write dialogue and is really what captures me so much. So,
well, I would definitely read an entire comic book of Black Cat and Doctor Strange needling each other. I really enjoyed that. I think you should pitch it.
That was my favorite stuff to write in there. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write Peter. Like, I've written Peter a few times. He's in Hawkeyes and some other things. And I was like, I'm going to write Peter. And then when I was like, wait, we're going to have scenes where Black Cat and Strange meet. And I was like, that's such a good, like, what a good antagonistic couple. Like, what a good pairing. And then I was like, can they sleep together? And Marvel was like, no, they cannot. And I was like, okay, just making sure.
I think she's still sleeping with Batroc, maybe. I don't know. So,
yeah. It's all craziness, but
I was just chatting with my co-owner today, who's a big Doctor Strange guy, and he's like, I think something's going on. And I'm like, no, dude, it's a comic book. But I want to remind everybody, Dark Detective #1, or the whole series, all 4 parts are out now. We can get you caught up on Dark Detective if you want to find out where Grifter is going as that new series starts up over at DC. We also have a ton of Matt stuff, whether it's with Spider-Man, X-Men. Of course, we carry We Can Never Go Home and 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank. I love, they're really nice. They're nice additions too. They're very tactile. I like what Black Mass does.
When Black Mass asked what I want the trades to look like, I said I want them to look like Jonathan Hickman books. That's actually what I said. I was like, let's go to the store and buy some of Hickman's Image books. And like, we went to the printer and we're like, what is this cover quality? What is this paper quality? Like this level of gloss. And they were like, oh, this is this. And I'm like, okay. I didn't know how to make comics.
I love it. No, I think that's wonderful. You have been so gracious with your time. It's really been a pleasure. I hope that one day we can do this in person.
I would love that.
We have some comics here, so and probably 2 or 3 we'd want you to sign while you're here.
I would love to do that, and I would love to buy some.
Those because we'll probably never shake hands again.
Sure,
we'll figure it out. Matt, what's the best place for everybody to follow along with you on what you're doing? Is it Twitter, Instagram? What's the best spot for you?
Yeah, I have a Twitter and an Instagram and a Facebook. I never update the Facebook. I forgot I had Instagram for 9 months.
Sure.
Someone was just like, yeah, you never post on your Instagram. And I was like, I don't have, and I was like, oh no, I do have an Instagram. So it's Twitter would be the answer. It's still not a great place to follow me because I just say a lot of dumb stuff, but it's at Ashcan Press, ASHCANPRESS.
Perfect. That's it, man. I thank you again for your time tonight. You've been super gracious.
No, thank you.
Thank you for jumping in as well.
No problem. It's nice to meet you, Matt.
Yeah, it was great to meet you. Thanks so much for picking up the books and the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
No
Thanks
problem.
for everybody for listening. Matt, we will follow up on Twitter. I'll send you a message here in a little bit.
Awesome.
Another thank you for being here. Have a great night. Stay well. Take care of yourself. Take care of everybody you love.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
We'll talk.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Jason. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, how much fun was this? Talking with Matt and talking with, of course, Jason. I get to see Jason all the time, so this is fun talking to Matt too. No offense, Jason. A blast. I have really enjoyed Matthew's books. If you haven't picked up any of his stuff, do it. There's a wealth of it out there. As you can tell, he's a super nice guy, does really cool stuff, is working in a very cool industry, and just thrilled to have him. If you want to know more about us in the shop, you can go to neighborhoodcomics.com, at NBRHD Comics on all your social media platforms. Don't forget to pick up all these Perfect Crosses starting March 3rd. You can get it at perfectcrosses.com or at your local comic shop. Just tell them that you want it, and they can find it. Thanks here. Stay well, and we'll see you next time at the old comic shop.